Air War over Korea 1951. This is a folio game by Decision Games. I've been reviewing and playing a lot of folio games by Decision Games because they're simple, because they're easy. In these times of pandemic, early 2021, when my kids are stranded at home with me because of the pandemic, then I'm just too busy. I don't have the mental stamina to play complicated games, and so small, simple, introductory level folio games are just what I need. Now, this is a game that is mainly for two players, really. One player will control communist forces in the Air War over Korea in 1951. The other player is the UN player. And the idea is the communist player will try to defend targets on the board while the UN player is going to try to bomb the heck out of them. And at the end of the game, really, the level of destruction that inflicted on the opponent is what determines victory. So mainly for two players, mainly because there is an element of fog of war, and I don't get to play with adult human opponents these days because, I don't know if you heard me say that, times of pandemic. And so I played the game solitaire by myself, controlling both sides to the best of my possibilities, and I find that the game actually works that way. You lose the fog of war and it becomes more of a puzzle, but the puzzle element is interesting enough, and I think the game is perfectly playable in that fashion. So, the game will will take place over 5 momentous days between October and December. Each day turn is split into up to 10 hour turns, and these really are the main game turns where you move and attack. Up to, because different months have different length. As the days shorten, then starting from November, the November turns only last 9 hour turns, and the December turn only lasts 8 hour turns. So the October ones are the ones that last 10. General view of the map, although you could already see most of it, is square grid based, and you cannot move diagonally. That keeps things simple. Up there you have several displays in which you keep track of the command level of the two sides. Very important because it determines stacking, how many units you can have in the same space, and also determines how many event cards you have, and these are super important. They give you different advantages. At the beginning of each day, the communist player will set up their defenses on the board by placing air units in airports and by placing anti-aircraft units in locations of their choice, and then the UN player will waltz in from these locations using carrier-based aircraft, and from this location here. They come in, they fight in the air, they try to bomb targets, and they try to get the heck out of there. This is the general idea. Units will represent anti-aircraft forces, in which case they have there the anti-aircraft power, and then we have air units. Some units have a J indication. That means that they are jets, and that means that in combat all jet units go first to attack and resolve their attacks, and then the non-jet units will try to do their part. And within that limitation, then the defender for that turn, for that phase of the turn, goes first, and the attacker goes next. Then we have indication here, some units are fighters, some units are bombers, some units are pretty eclectical. They are fighter bombers, so you can choose if you want to use them as a fighter during a day, or you flip them to the other side. As you can see, the combat value is lower, but there's also that icon there. Those icons there indicate the bombing value, the bombing load that they have. And so the bona fide bombers can carry quite a bit. As you can see, the fighter bombers, not so much, but you have that option in case there's a day in which you want to push for bombing accuracy or for bombing loads. After maybe you use your fighters to clear the air, then the fighters can do the job of bombing. And the other factors, the numerical factors that you see at the bottom, are maybe predictable combat value and movement value. So, how does a turn work? you will have an intruder phase, and then you will have an interceptor phase, attacker, defender, so to speak. The intruder first will move their units, and again, in this case, I'm just going to put some kind of random game pieces there, just for the fun of it. The intruder will simply move. During their flying phase, they will move up to their full movement allowance. You have to stop if you enter an area that includes enemy units. And so, for example, I have my little fighter bombers here. No bombers here. I have my fighters that are protecting my bombers. And I just decide to move them by 3. 1, 2, 3, or even maybe just by 2, because I want to blow that breach there. There's a breach there. That's what the symbol is for. Simple as that. You move your units, you stop if you enter an area including units of the opponent. Then if any of your units are in areas that contain anti-aircraft defenses, you resolve the kind of combat, so the anti-aircraft will fire at your units. Well, actually first you resolve combat between units in the air, then combats between anti-aircraft and aircraft, and then if you have units that have a bombing capability, like my bomber there, in a valid target, and you decide to bomb it, don't have to, then you resolve that kind of combat also. So there are 3 types of combat that seems pretty scary, but in truth it's pretty simple and straightforward. The idea is always the same. You get a bucket of dice. This is a bucket of dice kind of game in which the combat factor indicates how many dice you will use. Which means if you're attacked by 2 fighters of the opponent, you have to deal with 8 dice, which can be pretty bad. So for those 3 types of combat, every time that you need to resolve combat, you will simply pick up as many dice as the ones allowed by the fighting units. And then you look here in the back of the rule sheet for this specific title. This is one of those games that belongs to a general family of games, so you have series rules, and then you have a single sheet for the specific title. And also the sheet contains the tables. So if, for example, I'm bombing, as simple as that, I pick up my bucket of dice based on how many bomb icons I have on the airplanes I'm using to bomb, and I roll them. And then I cross-reference the result. I look at the result on the column or whatever it is that I'm trying to bomb. I'm trying to target a bridge, then only 6s will count as successes. If I am resolving anti-aircraft combat, a unit with an anti-aircraft value of 3 is firing at me. I roll 3 dice and I see what happens. And the unit is aborted, it gets out of the game temporarily, it'll come back later. And sometimes anybody's aborted, sometimes only non-jets are aborted. Air superiority is the table that you use to resolve combat in the air. Pretty simple. Roll dice, a bucket of dice, 1 die for each combat factor involved. Use the column corresponding to the kind of aircraft that is firing. And again, you see the result, which may be nothing, maybe an abort, which again means temporarily out of the game. Kill, which I think it means damage. Although the table says that there is no kill. There's no kill box for the. There's no kill box up there, and there are game effects that allow you to bring back units from a damage box. So that's how I played it. In any case, it means you're removed from the game unless you use a refit game effect. And this is very important. So, but that's the general idea. As you can see, it's pretty simple. The attacker moves, stops when you're sharing space in the air with an enemy, resolve combat in the air, resolve combat from the ground, possibly resolve bombing, and they're all variants of the same idea. And that's pretty much it. You continue like this day after day. Make sure that you land at the end of the day, and you continue like this until the game is over, and then you score points. One last thing, again, these cards are very important because they give you the tempo of the operations, the changing scenario, the changing circumstances, logistically speaking, are largely due not just to what happens in the battlefield, but also to these cards. And these cards will give you different effects, such as this one, refit 2 damage UN units. Pretty good, they come back. And also the card will tell you what happens to that card, which is important because some cards will be reshuffled, some cards will leave the game, and that means that your deck will change slightly, or not so slightly, during the game. And just to give you a sense of what happens, or some of the possible effects and options. Different kinds of advantages, different kinds of situations. So, I enjoyed this game. This is the only kind of war game pretty much I can play these days, but there was always room in my heart and in my gaming schedule for a lighter game. It just used to be in between bigger games, and now it's mainly what I play, and that's okay. So I can still play some games. This is the time of our lives that we have, not necessarily the one that we chose. So within these constraints, then you have a game that is a nice little puzzle that you can still play. Solitaire. Again, this is important. I do look forward for a time when I can play with a human opponent, because I think there will be interesting elements here of bluffing, misdirection. But you can play, as I played the game, with all the pieces face up, knowing exactly where everybody is, and you can still play it that way, playing both sides at the best of your possibilities. It becomes more of a puzzle rather than really a struggle of fighting in the dark. But I found it to be an enjoyable puzzle, as both sides do have interesting situations that they need to deal with. As the UN forces, well, at the beginning, it can be tough. I was actually surprised by how strong the jet fighters of the opponent could be and how deadly those attacks could be. If you fight against 2 enemy jet fighters as the UN player, you're gonna get hurt early on. But then you are gonna bring people back more efficiently than the opponent. The opponent has cards that do not by default give you the ability of bringing back reinforces later on in the game. As the communist player, you can choose between refitting units or doing something else, and the UN player is more efficient at bringing back units. So those decks really do a lot of have a big impact in helping you give the game a certain narrative architecture to see how logistically the UN forces have the upper hand, but in the long term, they're in for the longer game. So you have that interesting elements there as the situation becomes increasingly slowly, quite surely, more dire for the communist player. So it's an interesting element there, as both sides are trying to trade opportunity for gain. You can try to get a big gain now, but those powerful jet that the communist player uses to defend, they're also brittle. So there's a little bit of that element that you have sometimes in games about blitzkrieg. You're getting some mighty advantage early on, but those brittle mighty jets don't come back nearly as efficiently as the other side is able then to bring back reinforcements, to bring back refitted units, and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting situation for both sides, and it's a fairly fluid situation as both sides have different kinds of priorities. As the UN player, you can try to push in different directions of the map, and it can be frustrated as the communist player. You have these mighty jets, but they cannot protect everything. There are just so many juicy, delicious targets that the UN player can try to get. So you have a situation that evolves over time because of the different logistics and the different refitting capabilities and the different level of reinforcements. So that's also fun. You're not doing the same thing 5 times, but you're doing it in different circumstances every time. Even the changing length of the game of the game turns changes the situation and adds and adds just more tension. And I would say that's a game that has quite a bit of tension, which of course makes it interesting. I love the fact that the game system, that the combat system is so simple. As yes, 3 light variants of the same general idea of the same bucket of dice, but still you have incentives in playing around with those and figuring out how to use your jets or non-jet units. Some units have short range, and so again you have a little bit of variety there because they can only be in the air for a little while. So I really like the fact that you have a very simple core of ideas, a very simple combat system with just enough chrome to make you feel that you're playing a game about a circle situation rather than a completely abstract game. So in general, this is an entertaining game, very simple, very light. You could play to introduce a new friend to this side of the hobby, but please do it after the pandemic. Don't risk anybody's life based on gaming. It's a game that for the time being you can play by yourself, and in any case a game that I believe works well enough as a solitaire game. So Air War over Korea 1951, definitely an entertaining introductory level war game that does translate well enough as a solitaire game.